for watching Wood and Shop. I'm Joshua Farnsworth. So this is going to be the most important video probably that I've done on traditional woodworking. The reason for that is it is on learning how to square up and dimension rough boards like this piece of junk that I got at from a lumber mill. They were throwing it away, but it's actually not a piece of junk on the inside. And learning how to square it up and make it smooth and dimensional and useful for building furniture out of. So that's why it's one of the most important things that we could learn as traditional woodworkers, is because that's the most fundamental, is taking rough wood and making it usable in furniture. And this was something that I really had a hard time learning at first, trying to find free resources when I first got started in traditional woodworking. So I'm going to show you what I've learned over the years, try to make it as simple as possible so that you can get all of your sides square and cut to perfect dimensions and get a nice, smooth, furniture-grade board. The first step is to cut the board to rough dimensions using panel saws, like this cross-cut panel saw, which has teeth like a knife, which can cut across the grain, and a panel saw to cut down the length. Most of the times, I just start off cutting off the length, because you can see how rough this board is here on both sides. So I'm going to cut this off and tighten it up in my vise. You can use a sawhorse if you have one. And I first take my tri-square, and this doesn't need to be super accurate, but I'll take the tri-square and lay it about where I want to cut it off, and use this soapstone or a pencil or something and run it along there. After cutting your board to your rough dimensions with panel saws, the next step is to flatten one reference face, or the face you're going to measure everything off of. Some people like to do an edge first. I like to do a face first. So you can try it out and see what you like first. So the first plane that you're going to use is a scrub plane, or even probably more economical is to get a jack plane and camber the edge of the iron or the blade there, and open the mouth up so it gives you a nice bite. And you're going to be taking it and going across the grain like this. And you'll notice it gives you some big shavings. These could probably be a little bit bigger, so you just tighten the adjuster there and get some bigger bites. But you can see I'm just shooting over the board because there's so much in the middle. Because it's kind of cupping this way. The reason it's cupping that way is because of the movement. The grain is originally like this. The bark is out here, so it tends to cup towards the bark side. So when you put it in your vise, instead of putting it on this end, like here where it tips, you can see how it rocks and you'd have to shim it up too much. Put it down there and tighten it, not too tight, but tighten it in between your bench dogs on your bench. And because there's too much cupping in the middle, I'll take some passes over here to bring this down to make it a little bit easier. Now this isn't a precision instrument here. This is really rough work, so you don't need to worry about really tuning this up a whole lot. But just take some down in the middle. I'd actually first bevel this edge here, because when we start going across you don't want to tear it out. So but you don't want the bevel to go down further than if you're worried about not having enough thickness. Just be careful about that. Oh, that's nice. And so then you can use your plane like this to see how close you are. So it looks like I've still got a lot of rocking in here, and this is a lot higher, so I'll knock it down. So then I like to go across the grain first and do a rough pass. Let me take a little bigger bite. You can see these are definitely not fine shavings. These are almost like kind of like biscuits or something. Once I found that this was relatively flat by running this down and sighting under it, I took a few passes across lengthwise there, and now the step is to look and see if there's any wind in your board. So in order to do that, you'll use something called winding sticks. You can see these winding sticks. One of them has some little darker bars there, and I place that one away from me, and I place this one on this end parallel to each other, and I get here in the center and I go down and I sight down here and I see which one of those bars is higher than the other one, and that tells me that my board is kind of twisted or in wind. So what I'll do is, this one actually looks like that one's a little bit higher. So what I'll do is I'll just mark that, and it's very likely that this corner over here is also a culprit, because boards usually tend to do that when they're winding. So now that I've marked these edges these corners that are a little bit higher, I'll place my straight edge on here, and I can see that it is a little bit higher. So that means in the next step I'm going to focus on these two corners. After I've determined the high spots, and I know that these two corners are a little bit high, I will take a different plane, which is a jointer plane. This is a number 7 jointer plane, and I will go across from this high corner to this high corner a few times until I take that pencil down. And this really long bed will skip all the little valleys, and it will make the surface a lot flatter than a smaller plane would do. A smaller plane would kind of like a smoothing plane here would just ride the valleys, but a jointer plane will skip over those and level everything together. You don't want to go too far before you check it with your straight edge. Okay, that's looking a lot better. So now what I can do is take some passes diagonally across both ways and continue to use the straight edge and the winding sticks to make sure that the wind stays gone, and just to check my progress with flatness. And then after I do some diagonal passes, I'll take some passes with the grain. So you may notice that I try to always keep the downward pressure right over the iron as much as I can. If you shoot out over the edge and you're putting pressure down here, then you're going to cup the board. So when you enter the board, you're pushing down here. When you get on the board, you're pushing straight down here. And when you're leaving the board, you're removing your hand. You could even, to practice it, just take your hand off or just lighten your pressure and push all the pressure on the back so that it stays flat. So now you can go ahead and continue to check it to see if you're creating any cupping or anything. This looks pretty good. And then just do some passes across until you're getting full-length shavings all the way across. Okay, check this. You can twist your straight edge back and forth, and that looks pretty good. It looks pretty flat. We'll test it for wine to just make sure that we haven't reintroduced any. And that looks pretty good. So we'll go on to the smoothing plane next. So you can tell when you're ready to move on to the smoothing plane when you start to see full-length shavings like this from your jointer plane. And also when, as mentioned, your board appears flat in all the different ways. And like this too. So just set aside your jointer plane when you're at that stage and pull out a smoothing plane. Got a couple of different types of smoothing planes here, like a number 4 Stanley. This is the cheapest and most common. It's a very good plane. Or a little bit wider, which I like, is this number 4.5 Stanley smoothing plane. And this will get your surface smoother than sandpaper. So just take even strokes vertically all the way down. And that gives a glassy, smooth finish. You can take one more pass if you need to, and if you see any little track marks, that means that you need to camber the edges of your iron just a little bit. Give it a little curve like this one to take out those tracks. So you can see how I don't have any in here. And this face is ready. So what I'll do is I'll make a little mark, a little squiggly mark on here. And then we will work on this edge right here next. Now that we've got a nice flat reference face, I'm going to put the reference face towards me in my vise and grab my jointer plane. You can use a jointer plane like this, or you can use a nice older jointer plane like this one that I built. Most of you will have a number 7 jointer plane probably, since they're so common. And the key here is you change your grip a little bit and you kind of pinch right here, and then you use these fingers up against your reference face here to try and give yourself a 90-degree angle as much as possible. And if this is really rough, some people like to use a jack plane to get it down. It's another step for me. So I just prefer to get started. Oops, not like that. And the key is to try and make sure that your plane is adjusted so that you're taking the shavings right down the middle. Now I have a tendency to go one way or another, and when I put my combination square on here to check my progress, I'll notice a lot of times that I've got a gap at one spot, that it's tilted down like that. So this was looking pretty good down here. There's no light showing, but I start to get a little bit of high spot there and more there. So I take my pencil and I mark the areas that I have high spots. So it looks like there's kind of a high spot all the way along there. So that means I need to concentrate the pressure a little bit more on that side. And sometimes if it's really extreme, even tilt just a little bit. But use your fingers, remember, over here as a guide. And remember what I said about about putting the pressure here when you start, together, straight down in the middle, and then when you come off, don't put pressure down in here because you're going to create a crown in your board. So something you should try to do, which isn't possible, is to try and scoop it out like a scoop of ice cream in the middle. And what that will do is it will cause you to have a flat edge there. So another thing that you should do as you're working along is to test for just that exact thing, to see if you're scooping at all. And it looks pretty good. It looks pretty even underneath. And then I'll just take this, and the key is to absolutely make sure you're using your straight edge, or sorry, your combination square or your tri-square up against your reference face, because we want to create a 90-degree angle along here. So it looks like I've solved that problem all along there. So now we have a perfect 90-degree angle. And so I'll put a different mark on this spot right here. And this is a really ancient mark for telling us that we have a reference edge and a reference face. So now we can move along and base everything else, these other sides, off of a perfect 90-degree angle. Before we can true the other edge up, it needs to be we need to have a way to make it parallel with this first reference edge that we made. And to do that, we use a panel gauge. So panel gauge is like a marking gauge, but a lot longer, and it's used for panels, not surprisingly, like this. So what you first need to do is decide how wide you want your board. I'd like to keep mine as wide as possible on this, because this is a nice 8-inch board. So I want to make sure that it's trimmed all along the length though. So I'll check this and make sure that I'm going to 8 inches is not going to be hanging out over the edge here on one of the edges. So I'll mark 8 inches right here. And if you were going to remove a lot more, you could mark it in further and scribe that, and then use a panel rip saw like this, and you'd cut it close to that line, and then you'd joint this other edge in. But I'm just going to take off a little bit with hand planes. So I will take this gauge and set it about on my line. I could even go, yeah, we'll do that. We'll set it right on the line at 8 inches, and then tighten this down. You can also use this nifty pencil edge, but I like to have a nice crisp knife line. And then hold it up to this reference edge and just pull it along. So now you'll notice that you have a perfectly parallel line here to here. So that will give you two perfectly flat glue-up lines once we get this edge down. So I'll go ahead and put this, flip this around in the vise, and like this, and remove this with, you could use a jack plane since there's so much material there to remove, and get close to it and then use a tri-plane. Or if you're really close to the edge, you could just use, your joiner plane there to bring it down to the edge. So I'll do that now. So I've taken this down almost to that line, and while I've been doing it, I've been checking it with the combination square and with the straight edge to check my progress, to make sure that I have another 90-degree angle here and that it's flat and not cone-shaped there. So I am a little bit closer to the line here than here, so I'll take a couple passes on this end and then take a couple full-length shavings, and just before I hit that line, I'm just going to do a final check, and that looks really square. I've got a little hair here more than there. And I'll check this now that I'm down there. Perfectly 90 degrees. And it's perfectly flat there. So now you'll notice that we have a reference edge, a really nice reference edge, a reference face that's flat, and another 90-degree edge that's flat to that. So now the simple thing to do is to just take a marking gauge like this in order to determine what our other side is going to be like as far as the thickness. So you can take your marking gauge along here and find your lowest spot. Or if you have a predetermined thickness you want to try and match with some other boards, you can just take that thickness. But I'll just keep this as thick as I can. So I'll get my lowest spot there and go a little bit below it and set that there. And I'll check it on the other side as well. And the other side's a little lower, so I'll drop this marking gauge down a little bit more. I'll use this other edge, since it's got the lowest spot, and I'll set the gauge a little bit below that because I'm going to do some rough removal. And so now this is our new thickness. So what I'll do is take this measurement and run it all along there and up against our reference face. See that? And then I'll mark this so I can see it better. And then as I go down through and plane, I'll plane this side, this face here, just like we did before, starting off with a jack plane, and then with a joiner plane, and then with a smoothing plane. And so this will be a uniform thickness all over. So I'll go ahead and just do the same thing with the jack plane, the joiner plane, and the smoothing plane. Flattening the other side of the board is a lot easier because you have those lines all the way around to tell you when it's parallel. And I still check it with the winding sticks and with the straight edge, but it's a lot easier to just gauge where you need to give a little more or a little less. So now that I've flattened this side, and I've just verified it with my straight edge, it's time to move on to smoothing. And I'll just take a few passes that overlap each other. And if you find that this is rough going, it's tearing up, then flip the board around. That means you're going against the grain. Okay. So I have 4 perfect sides right now. I've got 2 flat and smooth faces, and I've got 2 jointed edges, and they're all 90 degrees to each other. They're tried and true. The only step left now is the ends here. So on the ends, what you do is you make sure you have a tri-square that you've tested to be actually accurate, and you're going to use your reference edge and your reference face to put your square up against. And so this, then what you want to do is, if you have a particular length that you need to cut it to, you'd measure down to the other end wherever it is you need, and make sure you put your square on the reference face and reference edge again, and make sure you can see this. So I will leave it up to you how you want to cut this. You can do it with a cross-cut handsaw like this. But I found that the easiest way to do it is to use a miter box saw. So that's what I will do, and trim these edges. So this process can take a little while, but make sure you have your reference edge up against the back there and just cut along your line. It's pretty easy. Now that I'm finished with sawing these edges square like that, one thing to mention is, if you're doing a larger panel that's wider than what your miter saw can handle, you can simply put your board in the vise like this, draw your line, and then take a cross-cut panel saw and saw as close to your line as you can get without hitting it, and then come up after that and use your block plane and come from both edges. Don't go over the edge or you'll tear out, and come back that way until you get down to your line, and then you'll have a perfectly square line as well. Just make sure you scribe before you do that, that you scribe your straight line across there with a pencil. Well, I've got 6 perfect sides, flat and smooth faces, true edges, and ends that are square to the edges. And it was a good deal of work, but it's a lot more satisfying to me than using a power jointer and a planer and a table saw. It's a way that it was done hundreds of years ago, even 100 years ago, and it just gives you a lot of satisfaction. I know there was a lot of details and a lot of tools used in this. If you visit the accompanying blog post, the link is below this, you'll find a very detailed blog post with photos and detailed steps, along with all the tools that I used in this. You don't have to worry about writing it all down. So thanks for watching this tutorial on how to square and dimension your boards. And if it's been helpful, then subscribe up at that blue button up there, and visit woodandshop.com and subscribe to receive my other blog posts on how to get started in traditional woodworking. Thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you can find free video tutorials, buying guides, and reviews. Make sure you subscribe to my regular blog posts, and also check out my 10 steps for getting started. Enjoy!